Welcome, Kent. Thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast.
Thank you, Bobby. Super excited to attending and to talk with you today about this interesting topic. Yeah.
One of the things that I find really interesting is how startups and scale-ups, well, businesses in general, how they navigate the current crisis. And I think that would be a really good topic to talk about today. So first of all, before we start today, what does the global head of growth at Danske Bank do?
Danske Bank Growth, first of all, is a specialized unit in the bank focusing on startups and scale-ups. We are a Nordic team, plus 50 people, and we were founded back in the end of 2016, where the bank acknowledged that we had difficulties on understanding the startup and the scale-up field, and we wanted to interact and be a better part of that and help these companies scale their businesses and also become a better bank towards that segment. And that was actually the purpose with growth when we were founded back in 2016, was creating a team in the bank with special knowledge towards this segment that then could be a better bank towards customers with these different types of a way of scaling and these different types of special things that is related to startups and scale-ups in general.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it was you founded a new section in the bank to try to learn to be a better bank for startups. But what do you think that is? What does it mean to be a bank for a startup?
First of all, it was about bridging a lot of the misunderstanding that there was back in the days. A lot of startups and fast-growing companies doesn't fit into traditional banking models because they scale super, super fast. They have limited historical data. A lot of them do negative results because they think about their top line growth, their revenue growth, and are financing their negative results with investment capital or funding coming into the company. Mainly built on tech. So you also don't have all the physical assets that you have used to financing as a bank. So that was just a lot of general stuff and things related to startup and scale-up companies that made them fit really bad into traditional banking models. And that was one of the first issues we had to solve. So gaining a lot of understanding internally in a team, and then after that, finding out how should we then serve the segment? How could we be a better bank? How could we help the companies on the journey that they wanted to take? So that was the understanding part was crucial in the beginning. And when we started out building growth, the hub was 1 year old. So do you know the platform, the hub?
Yeah, I know the hub, but could you just briefly tell us what it is?
Definitely. So the hub is a platform, a Nordic platform focusing on mainly recruiting. So it helps startups recruit. And today it's a platform having around, if I remember right, around 6,000 to 7,000 startups on the platform.
That's really good.
It's posted around 700 jobs every month. So it has actually become the biggest recruitment platform for startups in the Nordic. And that was one of the first steps the bank took in the direction of helping the startup segment without thinking about gaining any kind of business case or revenue on it. But it was a platform created to solve some of the biggest issues that the startups had. And that is about finding the right team, finding the right people.
Yeah.
On the platform, there's also a section about funding and best practices tools that is helpful for startups to know and use.
So what is your job? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm heading this team of growth advisors across the Nordic, which is a team around plus 50 people, which represent relationship managers, which is what you usually will call a business advisor. So an advisor that takes care of businesses in the bank. That's the main people. The most people is related to taking care of businesses. So our relationship managers, but towards startups and fast-growing companies, scale-ups. In the team, you also have personal banking people, private banking people, credit, rating, a lot of different units we have involved in the team because it was needed to have a broader understanding of the segment, not only in the business banking area, but also towards personal banking, private banking, credit, and so forth. Because we also have some founders, you have some investors. When you present the cases towards the credit, it's super important that we have some credit people that understand the segment better, and you can start on the same page discussing the companies and all that. So it's a plus 50 people team across the Nordic. Most people in Denmark so far, but I've been focusing a lot on scaling the team in Sweden throughout the last year.
How is your job during this pandemic, during these days? Is it more difficult or is it the same?
I would say it has changed a lot because a lot of my day-to-day doing was a lot about having meetings, physical meetings, meeting with companies, meeting with stakeholders, joining a lot of events, facilitating a lot of events and offerings that was, again, physical programs, events and stuff like that, which we suddenly were not allowed to do, or we couldn't do it. So we suddenly had to rethink a lot of the offerings, programs that we had in the pipeline. And at the same time, everything went digital. So we had to do everything online, had to talk with the team online. We have to, really speed up the digital process.
How was it to, go from, meetings in person to meetings online? Was that like a big deal in a bank, or?
Let's start with definitely for the bank it was a big deal. We have been talking about having online meetings for a lot of years now, but what we have seen throughout the last couple of months has been really amazing on the acceleration and learning curve related to online meetings, and we have jumped several steps to where we are today because of the situation that the bank suddenly were in, that we had to do everything online.
Yeah, you got pushed into it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it has been I think in the beginning also having a lot of internal meetings. It were a lot about feeling comfortable in actually putting out your webcam, discussing online, a lot of things, because you're actually inviting people a little bit into your home, having these online meetings.
Yeah, because everybody's at home, during the crisis. So all the meetings are all of a sudden at home.
Totally. And of course, a lot of people were a bit of uncomfortable about that because they wasn't used to it. But now it just took a couple of weeks. People started to relax way more, and now it's just a very natural thing to actually do.
So what do you think that meant for your team? Will you keep on doing things this way, or what are your thoughts?
It's a really good question, and in discussion, I think is going on a lot of places now where a lot of things is also getting back to a more normal day of working, and people are getting back to the offices. So how can you adapt this into also the future way of working? All the learning by the online meetings. There's definitely something about being more efficient, being able to have more meetings. It's about meeting your customers when they have the time. There's a lot of transportation that is not needed anymore.
Exactly.
I was myself flying a lot to Sweden because we were scaling and growing the team up there. I will definitely rethink that and think more about what can I actually do online, because now we just had a month where we did everything online. So a lot of those things is about efficiency, meeting the customers, creating better customer experiences, actually being able to motivate and drive people also by having online meetings. I think you lose a little bit of creativity.
Yeah, because you're not with the team. So some things happen when you meet in person.
Exactly. And also the way of you have to rethink the way of building team spirit and team culture in an online universe, where there's also something there that I think is hard to replace.
Yeah, so you were talking about motivation for your team, and it seems, I don't know, I have this idea that being able to work from home can be very motivating. If you look at your entire life, it will make it a little more easy. It will be easier to fit in a meeting instead of skip all the transportation, and you'll be able to take more meetings, but also take care of stuff back home. So I have this idea that there's a better balance Do you recognize that in your team? People are more happy, maybe.
I think I've definitely felt that in the team that I'm running in the bank. Definitely, and also just broadly in the bank. We just saw Chris, our CEO, commenting on LinkedIn on I think it was an article from our COO talking about this, like how it has been this new flexibility of working has created a lot of positive impact on the employees and satisfaction. Way better work-life balance between private life and working life, and on the same time we could see that efficiency didn't drop, which I think has been always one of the hurdles really allowing people to work from home.
Do you have that like a culture where you can work from home already, or was that like a new thing you were forced into as well?
I would say in some areas of the bank it was more normal than in other areas, and more allowed in other areas. So it has been varying like from department to department, I would say, in the bank in general. Also because we are representing the startup, the scale-up segment, where we meet a lot of companies being really front runners of handling their teams, new ways of working, how to interact, create team spirit, all these things. I really also try to adopt that into the bank, and by that trust a lot in the people in the team, and also being really flexible on different ways of working and joining events, working from co-working spaces, doing a lot of these things that we've been doing.
When this passes at some point, I don't think that we can go back to how things were exactly before everything broke out. I think that, as you said, we would probably need to keep some of the good things. So we will take this as a learning process and use what we can, but we'll probably not go back. And I mean, people who now find a better work-life balance in the flexibility of also working from home, but also doing things online, skipping all the transportation, it would be really hard to undo that and just forget about how much better those things were. I'm not talking about everything, just some of the aspects. So now that we know that things can be better, it's hard to forget that.
I agree. There's definitely an efficiency, a cost, and also an environmentally benefit of doing way more online meetings and adopting that. And I think a lot of companies are also like, or what I'm trying to push also towards a lot of the companies we've been working with is the scalability in actually doing online meetings. So if you're actually able to sell by having online meetings, even though you are a SaaS company working with the big enterprises, where you usually have physical meetings on doing your sales, could you flip that into maybe doing online sales? Is it enough to have an online meeting to do the sales? Would create way more scalability and efficiency in sales departments around. And of course, we're also thinking about that, like the scalability and the efficiency and the volume we can put onto this.
I totally agree. I had, I think 10 years back, I had a change of mindset in how I ran my sales. So I had a lot of salespeople that were taking in-person meetings. So they were driving all around the country. And my company was a SaaS company. And because you pay a relatively low subscription fee each month, it is sometimes a bit difficult to justify spending a lot of time on meetings all around the country. So we decided to take a different approach, and we wanted to do as much as we could online. And what I learned from that process was that there will always be, when we're talking about sales, there will always be a key element of trust, that you need to establish trust. And we're used to doing that by meeting in person. But I think doing what we're doing right now with an online meeting is actually very close to that in-person meeting. And I think that you can obtain that kind of trust through these modern tools. And that's what we tried. And I think most of the way we succeeded in that. There will always be some times where it's better to meet in person. For instance, as you mentioned earlier, that creativity is something that happens when people meet sometimes. So I think that it's a good path. And I actually had some, in this switch from taking in-person meetings to only doing online meetings, we actually lost a couple of customers back then because they were really dissatisfied with the fact that we weren't driving around the country. But it was really difficult to justify that cost. And I think that this is so that's why I'm thinking this is a realization that a lot of companies has come to now, that a lot of the time there's no difference from meeting in person to doing an online meeting. And sometimes it's even better because you would actually be able to take a meeting that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. And I think that's one of the good things that we learned from this crisis.
Totally agree. And I also think it will be way more like going forward where people will really evaluate what will a physical meeting benefit.
Yeah, but also just meetings in general. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of companies have this meeting culture. And in my opinion, sometimes meetings are just a bad excuse when you haven't done your stuff. You call a meeting and you get to talk about it and you discuss the status, but there's not really any progress. So I hope that not being able to knock on each other's door all the time and do these in-person meetings, I hope that you'll actually skip some of the meetings, that they are not necessary. You don't have to do all those meetings all the time. Maybe you can just do it instead of talking about it. Yeah, so a lot of interesting things are happening in the culture of the way we work on a daily basis. And so that's at least one good thing. But I mean, you're in contact with a lot of companies and you've seen some of the things that they're doing to navigate this crisis. So in your opinion, what works? How can you get through a crisis like this?
Yeah, good point. We've been in talks with a lot of companies throughout the last couple of months related to this, and which is super natural that they're reaching out to their bank, discussing these things and seeing how we can help and having these general updates. There's definitely something in the startup, scale-up, founder mentality that is the right fundamental of getting through this in a good way. So being agile, adjust to change, execute, being not like too like changing your business model as you go. So there's a lot of like general things in being a startup, scale-up founder, and a lot of the really important competences you need to have as a person to succeed on building a company. That also in crisis situation is really, really amazing competences that you have to build upon and trust in. And then we have seen companies totally change, going from having a physical product to having an online product and doing even better than what they did with that physical product. We have had companies totally changing their customer segment because their customer segment suddenly died out. They lost 80% of their revenue from one day to another, and they had to sell their product to somebody else, switching it from maybe a B2B product to B2C product.
One of the first things that companies would probably do is to try to figure out how to cut costs, to figure out if there's something that they could spare. And how do you experience this?
Yeah. In general, when you are an early startup, cost is something you usually have a lot of focus on from day one. You are doing whatever you can to expand your runway, to maybe bootstrap as much as possible until you raise a bigger round of funding. So a lot of early stage companies are really good at navigating in the cost side and really cutting down. In this situation, it came as a shock for many people, and it came really, really suddenly, and it came just as a shock for just also a lot of traditional business environments and business companies in general. So it came so suddenly that people had to act really, really fast on it. Many companies, the biggest cost is employees. So having employees on your as a salary package is one of the places you have the biggest cost, and where it's also where you a lot of the companies has had to cut costs by letting employees go home or fire them to expand their runways. So they had a longer runway to get to the other side of this crisis, or to a point where a lot of the uncertainties were more clear about how will the situation develop. So I think that side is definitely a point. I think after the team, there's of course location, usually also a big thing. And I think in an environment where people are starting to work from home, I would imagine that some startups are considering skipping their co-working offices or offices in general. So looking at the runway and how to optimize your runway, I see it as there's three ways of doing it. There's your cost side, optimizing your cost. There is your revenue side, so how to get new customers on board, or maybe optimizing your customer cash flow. And that could be doing yearly payments upfront instead of monthly payments. So be creative on that part. And then you have the funding side on the last side, which the funding would include both lending, equity, your existing investors, new investors, soft funding, and so forth. So that's kind of like the three legs. And talking about the revenue side, it's definitely about being creative on the cash flow. So how could you maybe get more cash flow in now? And on the SaaS subscription models, getting yearly payments is definitely something to try out, as I see it.
Is this, a natural way of selecting the fittest companies, that, only the fittest companies will survive, and those that are not strong enough, they will not survive this crisis? Do you think this is natural selection within companies?
I definitely think that the crisis or the situation we are in here that came so suddenly, led into like a financial crisis now, will be something that will shape the new generation of big companies and the new generation of unicorns. So it will definitely shape teams and make them even stronger to accelerate on the other side of this. So, and I think that's what we've seen in other crises too, is that amazing companies is actually coming out of crisis situations. So there's definitely something there. And that will also lead into the startup, which is also just a startup fact, is that a lot of startups will not succeed. A lot of startups will die. And I also think that will also be the case related to this crisis here, that we will see startups not be able to get through this. What must not happen is that startups that actually had a chance to succeed or get through this died because of time or something like that. So that would be really, really sad to see, is that really good companies are dying because of this suddenly uncertainty or something like that. But I guess that there will be some companies that will not get through this.
Yeah, because there's some companies that they're so early stage that they're about to launch a new product, but the marketplace is just completely shut down, so they won't be able to launch their new product. But that's nothing to do with whether the customers or the marketplace would actually buy the product. It's just that it's very difficult to get access to new customers when you're a startup and you haven't launched your product yet, or maybe you're in the middle of launching a product, because companies, well, at least in the beginning of the crisis, I think that a lot of companies were really in survival mode, and they're going through their cost list and figuring out where to cut some of the costs. So they weren't really in the mood for buying new stuff, and that's also what I hear when you say that we shouldn't. It mustn't happen that we will lose good companies and good startups in this stage because of the crisis. But if it's an unfit company, that's maybe a different thing.
It's really good point about sales and also in new companies. We have also seen that because of the situation and the acceleration of digitalization in big companies has also matured a lot of markets and matured a lot of companies and customers really, really fast. So some startups also has really digital products that they were having some difficulties maybe about getting into the market because the market was not mature enough. Some companies were, but not many companies were not mature enough to tap into the solutions. Now we've just seen a really big, some kind of a maturement of big companies and the digitalization, which I think will lead into that some of the products that the startups are having or working with, the market will maybe be more ready for some of the solutions now than before, especially when it comes to digital communication, digital products, digital signing, a lot of other things. So I also think that that's also a perspective on it.
Yeah, definitely.
It's really hard if you like want to get out and sell your product, and then everything's just suddenly shut down. That's really tough. You really have to be creative on that part. And I also think that you will see some companies putting their startups a little bit on hold, and then are getting back to it when things are opening up again. It depends on how far you are, I guess, and how much you are.
Definitely. Yeah, I was talking to a startup not long ago, and we were discussing this exact situation that they weren't able to get in contact with new customers. So that was kind of like the mountain in front of them, and they were figuring out how to get, up and over the mountain. And we were discussing different ways. So instead of doing that and getting access to customers that were not accessible, we're discussing how can you get around this big, huge problem. And also what we discussed were maybe we could look at, a different segment, maybe smaller customers where the lead time is much shorter. So you would be able to get a customer faster than if you approach larger customers. And, also think about maybe developing stuff that, that were maybe further down the pipeline, but you have to push that now because that would probably open for, give you access to new types of customers and stuff like that. So I think that this is a part of the agility that is expected and what startups are really good at. And that kind of leads me into the next question, because there's also some industries and some companies that are doing really well in during this crisis. For instance, e-commerce is doing really well. A lot of people are pushed into buying more stuff online than actually going into the stores to buy, to make their purchases. So have you experienced companies and industries like this that are actually doing really good during this crisis?
Yeah, definitely, I would say. In the beginning, it was really hard because it came so suddenly. A lot of companies were really uncertain on how will this develop and how will this go. And in some of the e-commerce companies we saw had a dip in the beginning, but has actually gone really, really good through this. So where the e-commerce selling has continued or maybe even been growing. So the e-commerce space has definitely been evolving good, I would say. Then we have some companies working with subscription, B2C companies working with some kind of subscription where it could be a company like Goodie Box, where person get a box of makeup products and creams and stuff like that on a monthly basis. I would also say the B2C companies where it's direct to B2C has also been doing rather well, I would say, through this.
So subscription-based business models have been doing really well. Like, for instance, B2C, yeah?
I would say that B2C companies, SaaS companies, has been doing well. Then looking into the B2B companies, if it's a subscription-based company, you will still have your ongoing customer base. you will probably see some companies cancel it or go out of it. But it's definitely on the new selling part, I think it's been hard for companies. So if you don't have had a software solution that really helped in the new way of working from home, being really digital, all that, I think the new selling part has been the most struggling part for a lot of B2B companies through this, and especially in the SaaS space. But then you also have the companies that has been totally tapping into the new way of working from home, communication from home. Just some of the communication platforms like what is it called?
Zoom,
for example.
Yeah. I wished I bought some stocks in Zoom.
Yeah, exactly. And then also Microsoft Teams that we now starting using combined with Skype.
Yeah.
So all these things is just accelerating. Which is really positive. So
this is not over yet. I mean, we're just in my mind we're just taking a break actually, because the virus is still there. We don't have a permanent solution. We don't have a vaccine, and there's talks about a second wave of the COVID-19. Do you think it's possible to prepare more now that we know that there might be a second wave?
I think a lot of companies has already what we have heard in the startup segment is definitely people have been thinking about 12 to 18 month runway, how to get through that on a limited amount of funding, and making plans for that, raising capital to do so. Luckily, a lot of companies and startups, scale-ups, were really good capitalized and had raised really a lot of amount of funding. A lot of those companies would need their capital to last longer now, or have still cut down costs and been able to had to let people go, because then their funding will last for a longer time, because maybe new selling was harder than expected because of the situation they suddenly were in.
Okay, that was really interesting. Just before we end, where can people follow you?
Yeah, good question. So we are active on LinkedIn.
I will drop a link for your LinkedIn profile in the description of this podcast, so that people can easily find you.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with me. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I think that's a wrap.